Thank you, everybody, for, scrambling together to read your slides and being able to pull this together. I think it's been, I think just the fact that we did it was helpful. And it was great for those that did come to be able to ask their questions and feel that their comments were valued. So I thought it was great.
Yeah, I definitely think this is something we'll keep going forward.
Great idea.
And even after COVID, I'm wondering if it wouldn't be a good idea to do it virtually, ongoing, only because sometimes people don't want to drive, say, to MVU, wherever it is we hold things like this. Well, we haven't had this in the past, but we certainly have had informational meetings, and sometimes that becomes a hindrance when they have to drive to it. So I would think something like this, we could still host it virtually, even beyond COVID. I think get hopefully better attendance.
Also eliminates that chance of a big snowstorm or icy roads or whatever. So it's a good move.
So does anybody have any comments about the comments we received, or?
Go ahead, Terry.
I put this in the chat because now I'm like cool about chat. But I think that I thought you all did a really good job of putting it together and staying flexible and really listening to what people were saying and giving out all the information. I think everyone did well. And I apologize. I didn't see that I had been invited to the 6 o'clock planning meeting as well. So I'm sorry I didn't go to that. But it looks like you all did fantastic. So, and I really appreciate the people that came and some of the comments that they made. So,
yeah, absolutely.
We definitely have to make sure we get a copy to Ty, and maybe one person in Franklin that we know that would want to look at the draft book. Somebody in Swanton we know that might want to take a look at it just for input. And it was so great last year that Ty understands we're not necessarily going to put all of his thoughts or, do everything that people want, but just an opportunity to be able to look at it and say, yeah, this is helpful, or I wish there were more of this other thing. I think that responsiveness and frankly, it just helps us because it's a tool to market the budget. It's not anything more than that.
Julie?
Yes.
I wonder if it would be worthwhile to contact the chair of the select board in Swanton and let them know that it's available. I want to be careful because there was a time in Swanton where the school principal or superintendent went before the school select board to kind of get a approval, I might say. And I didn't think that was appropriate at all. I think it's great to discuss it and share it. And I think that's what it eventually became. But if we have something, I think to let the chair know that it's available and how they can see it would be good.
I think that's a great idea. We can reach out to that.
And Highgate and Franklin too. I'm sure Franklin's select board will hear about it, but I don't know about Highgate.
I think the select board chair is integrally involved. But yeah, I think that's a great option. I did want to touch base. We have had conversations with Nicole. She was making that comment. They have done a tremendous job at supporting our students. I approached them in August to see if they could do a hub or a childcare center, and they just really took it and ran with it. We can't give them our grant money or our personnel, right, to support, even though it's our kids. It's just, we're not able to do that. I think she understands that. We've had some conversations about what we can do, but I just thought I couldn't have planted her any better than to have somebody say, boy, we're going to need a lot of support for kids because they've struggled during this time. I think that's just really true.
Julie, I have a question. How do we help them? How do we like I know we have supports at the school, and when I say them, I mean our partners who are also supporting our kids. If we've got, I know we've got these restrictions with the grant, and you explained that really well. What other kinds of restrictions do we have? I mean, I know that we can't give them the gym at Swanton. I know they've asked for the gym, and we can't because of COVID and everything else. So I just wonder, yeah, when we put together the budget, are there things we should be thinking of for this, since we're talking about the budget right now?
I don't know if fiscally we can really, I mean, we give some money to Franklin Rec for uniforms and the registration of kids that are our students. You know, I don't know that typically they're very separate entities, right? I will tell you, we work really closely with them, and we like help them, point them in the direction of how to get a hub set up, and you know, supported them that way. You know, I one time said when we were in remote, maybe we could send our paras across to your program and have them help out. But, you know, obviously our staff were working and supporting kids during the remote time. And, you know, we can't use our staff to go support the kids in their program. What we can do are those things like let people know that they're hiring, and that, you know, if you're not working for our after school program, maybe you'd be interested in working for the rec program. I expect that this spring and summer are, you know, the strong and healthy start guidelines will change as conditions change. I mean, the governor said everybody should be back after April vacation. That's aspirational. That's, you know, should the conditions change and kids can sit closer to one another, and, you know, all of those things change. I would assume that also means, you know, that next school year we'll be able to have rec use our building. We'll be able to have, you know, the basketball and the all those other kind of community events in our school that we've been missing and they've been missing.
Julie, though, what are you doing that we're able to work with Franklin? What's different? Like, how could we expand that or something? Like what happens?
The board chose a couple years last year to put basically the Franklin Rec runs the elementary, you know, basketball and soccer too, right, Peter? And kids had to pay for their own uniforms. But if you go to Swanton or whatever, that's not the case. But we just have them invoice us for the cost of the uniform and the, Laura, you explain better, but it's like a flat cost, because that way students who are enrolled in our school, we support them so that they can do that. And that makes them more equitable to the elementary kids in Highgate and Swanton.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there was some magic thing we could, you know, increase, but it sounds like, no, they're doing it. Yeah.
I can tell you, Terry, we did work with them to provide meals for their students when they were there during the COVID, when school was not in session. We did make that available to them, and that was a great kind of little collaboration.
Well, if anyone can do it, you all will.
Yeah, I would think the only way that, you know, which right now with COVID is pretty hard to do, but perhaps I think that with the after school program and summer programming, I thought that Carol Lizotte used to have like do a partnership with them where they, you know, did something together where they, you know, maybe our staff could do something, you know, that they're sponsoring, and they would do something for us, but it was like a partnership with the after school program. And I do remember Carol Lizotte doing something with them. So I think that's where we could maybe go.
We can go back to that. We were going to have this big sort of unified program between rec and I think it was just in Swanton, but it was like a pilot. And so there were like 3 community partners that were going to all work together after school Swanton rec. And I'm not sure if there was another. And it was going to be this big expanded summer camp. And of course we just had to stop it all. But that doesn't mean we can't go back to that drawing board.
Julie, was the other partner the arts program? Because I know some of the students were in the arts program a couple of times when they had a midwinter thing at the village complex.
Yeah, it could very well have been, or the library like It was
Might
a
not
much
migrate.
more holistic sort of approach.
Right.
And so, yeah, as soon as we're able to go back to more standard practice, those are things that I know Beth Ann will want to look right into.
Yeah, that sounds great to me. You know, I'm still that cost per pupil in comparison to everybody else. I'd like us to give all these supports.
I know, we'll get there. So Laura, Chris, did you want to talk a little bit about the budget draft and conversations, that any adjustments, the changes that, talk about the auditor conversation, or?
Chris, do you want me to do that, or would you like to?
Yeah, I'll butcher it. I understand it, but to explain it, I'm not sure I could do that.
I might too at 7:45, but I'll give it a shot. So the last time that we met, there was some discussion about potentially creating a ed reserve because of our projected carryover. And so I'll just wanted to take a minute to fill you in. I've spoken to some of you already directly, but Julie and I did meet with the auditors. We had hours worth of conversation around what their general thoughts were about the idea of creating reserve funds, different purposes for reserve funds, how you go about doing that, potential language. And then also, since we don't have an audit draft, which we typically do have at this time, but that's going to be delayed even further because they're still getting information from the feds on how to report on all this money that's being sent to schools. Trying to get nailed down our projected carryover as our first audit from a merged district. So I'll speak to that first. In the tax rate information that I gave to you at the last meeting, we had a $3.2 million carryover fund balance, if you remember, in the fiscal year 22 projection used to offset taxes as part of our revenues. I've reviewed that with the auditors. We need to account for what was committed, and this is where it gets a little bit confusing, but we need to account for the $888,000 that we already committed for fiscal year 21. So I need to reduce the 3.2 million by the 888,000. It's all a big pool of money, but we've committed that. When we proposed our tax rate for the current year that we're in, we said we were going to use 888,000 of that carryover to offset this year's taxes. So we have that less out of the 3.2 million for next year, if that makes sense. Typically in our audit, when we receive it, it's very clear because it will say, here's your fund balance, here's the amount that was committed, and here's your adjusted fund balance. So, without that document, she said 3.2 million, I put it in, but it's actually the 2.3. So when we show you a tax rate page, I did put the new one in your shared drive. You will see very clearly the 888 being utilized, and now the reduction of the 3.2, which leaves us with about 2.3. So that's the start of the conversation because that projected carryover is lower than what we were using before. We still did continue conversations with them about the reserve issue in general, in case that was still something the board wanted to consider. In general, school districts do that. Some school districts do, some do not. The ones that seem to be doing it have done it historically. It's something that they've had from year to year. Our auditors do support it as something that is a fiscally responsible idea to an avenue to kind of smooth the peaks and valleys that can happen with a tax rate, and make sure those, you don't have the giant cliff that some schools see. But they did make it very clear that for MVSD this year, given the fact that we haven't spoken to our community about it at all yet, and the fact that we're sitting on a pretty significant carryover this year, I'm projecting a pretty large carryover going for the current year as well. That it's probably not in the best interest of MVSD to move forward with it right now. It may be something we consider in the future. We start marketing it now. We talk to our community about their thoughts on creating a reserve and holding back a certain part of that carryover from year to year, what the purposes of that funding would do, and really have a lot of discussions about that. So it's not a surprise to them, and it's a very purposeful kind of a design. Maybe the year for that would be, going into fiscal year 23 or 24 when these unusually large carryovers will stop existing. It'll prepare us for that. The last part of that conversation I will say is that also in the shared drive, I worked with my business office to review the current year financials, take in all the federal grant funding that I think we're going to receive, review special ed anticipated revenue and expenses, and come up with what I thought a projected carryover would be for this year. It's still early, it's only January, but I'm feeling pretty comfortable that this would kind of be a worst case scenario for the current year. And so after we take into account the utilization of the carryovers that I spoke of earlier, it would leave us with still about 2.4 million, 2.3 to 2.4 million as a projected carryover for the current year. And that would be used for fiscal year 23 to offset taxes. It always skips a year, which is why I'm not concerned about that cliff happening to MVSD in 22 and probably not in 23. I am concerned about 24, 25, because this COVID issue is going to, probably not resolve itself. The ed fund issue is not going to resolve itself right off. So there's a lot of information there, but it does all dovetail into itself. So please ask me questions, or if I wasn't clear.
Chris?
Go ahead, Don.
I talked briefly with Laura today as I've been thinking about the budget, and I don't want to get into it too much tonight, but it's something to think about. And I think the conversation that Laura and I had appeared to make sense, that we look at our current budget and see where we know we're going to have savings. The one I used with Laura was supplies, and see if maybe in the last quarter of the year, we should be buying things that we know we're going to need next year. And if we plan to do that, then when we do the budget, maybe we should show that as an anticipated expenditure. That might alleviate some of the peaks and valleys that could occur, but it also might make sense to do it in a few cases. I don't know, but as I say, we talked briefly about it. It'd be the full board would certainly have to decide, and the administration, Julie and Laura, would have to decide. But there might be a few line items where some advanced purchases might be beneficial currently and into the future. So just something to think about.
If I could just jump back in, because just to follow up on what Don's saying, Don and I did talk today, and that was another thing that the auditors did propose as an alternative to creating a separate article and asking to create a reserve. Since we are projecting significant carryovers, would be to address some of those issues that we put on hold, like facility issues, possible repair and maintenance issues, supply orders that we typically do, equipment orders on furniture, things like that we could make happen before June 30 to utilize some of that projected carryover. And kind of catch us up from things that didn't happen this last summer that typically happen. Mm-hmm. So that's another option to utilize those funds before June 30, or a portion thereof. Obviously, we wouldn't use all of them. But.
Laura, I know the other thing that we had talked about was the yield, and it's sort of a non-piece of information, but we touched on it in one of the slides to the community. A lot of business managers and superintendents actually talked about it today. A lot of business managers, we all know that the announced tax commissioner yield December 1 is always low. This year, it's exceedingly low. And even school business managers who never tinker with that announced yield are looking at perhaps using last year's yield or adjusting that number because frankly, the CLA has affected a lot of communities. I mean, it certainly affects us, but some of our surrounding towns, we're looking at 20-cent impacts and in huge impacts around us and in different parts of the state. So we discussed, as the possibility of doing that and decided against it. But I do think we touched a little on that slide. And when we market the budget, I think it's very important to say, we expect, this is your worst case scenario tax rate projection, really, and that we expect that it will improve. Because our CLA and the budget that we have proposed today, it impacts Highgate taxpayers the most. And there's nothing we can really do about that. Because we're actually proposing a budget that reduces our equalized tax rate, right? But we hate to see a community hit by the CLA. We know it means that people's house values go up, and that's a good thing, but it's it's hard at tax time, we know. So hopefully that yield will shift significantly. And that's another, Don brought up, advocating with your legislature. That's an area where we can really push and say, that yield needs to come up quite a bit and give some taxpayers some relief.
So Chris, are you ready for one more crazy idea before we end our meeting, or do we have a lot more to do?
Sure. Let's hear a crazy idea.
Well, this one is not thought out very well, but building on what Pierrette said tonight and what Laura said tonight, why don't we investigate to see if either through COVID funds for communications or whatever, we put a separate article on our warning to allocate $40,000 to have a communications board located at Missisquoi Valley Union High School for the MVSD district. And the taxpayers would be able to say yes or no. But we'd have to find out the source of funds, whether it be local budget or the other. But I didn't come to the meeting thinking that, but when I saw the enthusiasm for maybe a message board, and I think Laura said maybe with a tongue in cheek, maybe we could find COVID. I just wonder if we should turn over every little stone if we really believe that communications are important, and give that a try. And don't react tonight, because I want to get a good night's sleep. And I think probably body language tells me that's not one of my better ideas, but it's out there.
All I will say is we wouldn't have the opportunity to have an article if we were using grant funding from ESSER, and we were that would not require a a special article, and we would be using this year's carryover, which is money we already have. So if you went out to have an article, that would be next year's money that you'd be asking to use at a general fund.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I don't care how we get it.
Yeah, because I'm thinking if we can do ESSER funds, we won't need to put it out there at all if we use ESSER funds.
Or utilize a carryover.
Right.
Projected carryover.
Carryover or ESSER funds, we wouldn't need approval. It would just
I wouldn't
be
do
really
that.
transparent about
I
why
would be
we're
more
doing it.
transparent, because remember the year MVU had 5 budget votes or 6 budget votes.
Yep.
And the people and I was on the Board of Civil Authority and did work the elections. And the one thing I heard was I might have supported that. And I think football was the other partner if the board had been honest and upfront with it. So I wouldn't run the gamble personally of taking it out of carryover, but I would support asking the public, however they might fund it, maybe just as additional article. But enough said.
Terry.
Can I add to that? Maybe not enough said, Don, because actually I don't think it's a bad idea if everybody could see it. If it wasn't just tucked away when you drive into MVU, you see it. But if it was the MVSD, sign, and I would think it would come out of the ESSER funds or out of, like you said, purchasing supplies ahead of time. This would be something we could purchase this year while we have the extra money. It's not using carryover so much as it's spending what we believe we really need. And we have
I just would want to ask the taxpayers if we could do it.
Why would you ask them?
Because I think it's been highly controversial.
Oh, I didn't know it'd been controversial. Okay, thank you.
I think that year it was more about the football, Don, that was controversial.
Yeah, but there were 2 issues. Yeah.
Right, but what happened is it sort of bled out into that. But I hear you. I just think I'm kind of hoping we can do it in ESSER funds, and if it's ESSER funds, then really that's grant money, and then it wouldn't be something we'd be putting out to vote.
You're paying too close attention, Pierrette.
I'm really loving ESSER.
Yeah, I do think that the most important thing that we do, because we wouldn't want to give the taxpayer authority over something that's an administrative and board decision, but because it has been controversial and it's as visible as it gets, you message, right? And you're very clear about where the money comes from, why the purchase was made, and how the board made that decision. Because I think, it's not, the biggest complaint is things that people feel are not transparent. And this board has done a great job of, I mean, just think of tonight. Tonight was an opportunity to be transparent and get input before the budget is finally formed, so we've been really open to that. And when we have that culture, it shifts the way people's relationship with the school district. It shifts that.
Swanton Village doesn't do a lot of things well, in my opinion, but one things they do well, if they have any carryover, they have a separate article on the warning. Well, if voters authorize 38,000 of the projected carryover to buy, a sidewalk or something like that. And so that's the only reason I mention it. Public usually supports it, but at least they had their say. And for the 25 people in Swanton who probably won't vote a lot for anything, they get the chance to do that.
Peter.
Yeah, I really agree with Dawn that it's important to, and Julie, that it's important to make sure the voters know. I think if it was a grant money, I think, the voters wouldn't have an issue with it. They would support it. But taking it out of the funds, even if they're projected over, I could see them saying, you went and put up a new sign, but the driveway is a mess, So I think you have to be careful. And if we're going to use, budgeted funds, that we really should make sure we bring it to the voters.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the other thing we can do is put it in the budget, right? Not necessarily this one, but we can put it in the budget and explain what it is.
I agree with Peter. I think this is something that if we can get, if ESSER funds pays for it, great, I'm all for it.
Okay, now I'm sorry.
Unlikely, but if we can find a grant to pay for it, absolutely. I'm just really uncomfortable using our carryover to pay for it when there's so many other things that I think are much higher priority.
Absolutely.
So the only thing that I would say in regards to the tax rate is I did share the new tax rate calculation that's estimated in the shared folder. We do, according to our timeline, need to approve a budget at your next meeting. Otherwise, we will not have time to do what we need to do. So I just want to make sure that people have time to review that. If anybody has any questions about that or they're uncomfortable, the new couple little tweaks to the budget since your last draft that I was going to bring to the next meeting. We're at 1.97%. We're back up to the 1.97 from the 1.93, but we're still under 2. The only revenue that we adjusted was vocational. That's an absolute. So we received that figure, so we adjusted. I adjusted the equalized pupil numbers back. I had been overly conservative. I've spoken with the AOE. He met with our VSBA team, and I feel more comfortable not being overly conservative there. So I've adjusted that down to what the information is that he gave me. We are using the commissioner's yield and then the CLA. So I just want to make sure that people are prepared. If anybody has questions, reach out to me between now and the 19th because we really do need to move on those things on the 19th.
We will be hopefully adopting the budget. We will be approving the warning that will include what I assume everyone will agree to, which is a February 23rd, which is the Tuesday before town meeting, budget information hearing. That has to be in our warning. Then obviously the ballot itself also has to be approved. It takes a while to print those. We're going to spend the extra money and make sure that they're the kind that can be used for absentee and so that they fold properly and that we don't have any glitches there. We are also looking at an article to change from sending every taxpayer a postcard telling people that the annual report is ready. Like we discussed last time, it's $3,000 or more. Basically, the savings from doing that will pay for a better printed annual report. So we just think that that's a better use of school district money, and that will require an article. We've been wordsmithing that with the attorneys. So I think that's it. We're also, yeah, I think that's it.
Removal of the building use is the only other one, but we don't need it.
We don't
anyway.
need that because we're going to have a policy. So
Joanne, then Peter.
Sorry, Peter. So my question, and just, so the annual report, and I know this is one of the things that Ty brought up. I know, like, we're going to use him to go over it before we mail it out. When do we get to see a rough draft of that? Is that like in February? Like when does a rough draft of the annual report come out to us? Or is there one? You're going to tell me there's one in our shared drive.
There's not one in your shared drive.
Okay,
We
good.
can't prepare any of those documents. We have templates ready to move, but we can't prepare them until the budget's been adopted. So
Okay.
and some of
I was
the
just
items
thinking more the template, you know, like he had, and I just jotted some things down, you know, with looking for more information from even the conversations that happened last year at the meeting. You know, will there be more information on staffing? Will there be more information on enrollment? I guess I was just kind of, would there be a template that we could look at next week when we meet together? Even, no, not even, okay.
I can show you what we did last year.
Okay.
I would say that the budget itself, the financial pieces, some of them are necessary. So some are required by statute. You have to do a treasurer's report. The format is it's not the format. I don't mean the font and exactly the way that it looks, but the information that's in a treasurer's report is a requirement by statute. You have to report on last year and this year's expenditures, you know, budget to budget and anticipated. So that format of the budget will remain fairly consistent, where it's, you know, chunked out by using the account code structure as it's outlined by the state of Vermont. You know, those kinds of things will remain the same. What we can do is respond to the inquiries that other people made or the requests that other people made around finding a way to report out on staffing FTEs by building. We've talked about that potentially with Devin and I think Chris. Doing a facilities report, having our facility directors write up a facility report out on things that have been completed or that are included in this upcoming budget. Julie, I don't know if you want to talk about some other ones, but we can create maybe a super rough draft by then, but it wouldn't have content in it.
right. Yeah, we've also, the administrative team is discussing how to write our reports because, you know, when it was single district, the principal wrote a report, the board chair wrote a report, maybe the superintendent wrote a report. A lot of it's redundant. And so we're looking at creating, Chris doesn't get off the hook. He gets to write a letter every time and thanking the community and thanking everyone. And I will write
Writes a report.
I will write an administrative report. I usually put enrollment numbers right in there. And then we will have sections for each school. So rather than a separate letter, it will be a long administrative report. And we're going to use a condensed version of that to go in our newspaper insert. So I am going to be testifying tomorrow morning, but the administrative team is going to be discussing how long their reports are and how, you know, what are you going to put in it and what am I going to put in it? So they're working through those pieces right now. Because people want to hear, they would love to stop writing things. I think that's fair to say. And I told them that people want to hear from their principals, and they do. And they're glad to do it.
And Joanne, when we talk about timeline, that timeline that I shared with you last week, that or last meeting, I'm sorry, that was in there that kind of outlines all the different timelines or all the items that have to get us to an actual vote. If we look at that, basically between January 18th and February 5th is when we are starting the book, putting information in, getting the reports from the administrators, putting them into the right formats, those kinds of things. And I would be sending them to those community members for input around the end of January, 1st of February. Unfortunately, there's just not a lot of time to turn it around. We don't have a board meeting again and after the 19th until the 10th. So if the board did want to see the template after the 19th or weigh in on, these different drafts or versions, I would say we'd have to have a special meeting or do it kind of through email or virtually.
Yeah.
The printing deadline, it takes quite a while to go to print and for them to turn it around to us. So I have a pretty tight turnaround time.
How come we don't meet until the 10th of February?
No, we meet the 2nd.
We need to second of February.
Oh, wait, maybe I don't. Oh, that's right. Hold on. Maybe I didn't highlight it the right color. It's color coded. Sorry.
Okay.
Yep. Wrong color. So
I'm
we could
pleased,
do it on the 2nd. I could definitely bring something to discuss on the 2nd.
and I'm pleased to think the facility directors are going to work with somebody to write a facilities a report, because that was asked for.
Yes. We'll make sure we get that in there. That was definitely, we have all our notes from last year.
Okay, Peter.
So I had a brief conversation with Julie at our pre-meeting about Australian ballot and whether the legislature is going to want us to mail those out. So was discussing, and I've discussed with the town clerk, it would be nice to work with the town clerks and have them both go out in one packet. So when the voter gets, registered voter gets it, everything's in there. They're not waiting for another ballot to come. So I was just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, I'm going to try and call the town clerks to have that conversation with them, because obviously the larger the town, the more collating and stuffing of envelopes is involved.
Right.
So, but it just does not make sense to have a voter get an envelope with the town budget in it and then an envelope with the school district, and then it's confusing to the voter, which is what we don't want.
Plus, we can save money.
Yeah, so my understanding, I heard from Lisa Tango today, and she said she thought that would be optional, but is that something we're going to do, you think, Peter?
We're really, as far as the town goes, we're really waiting for the legislature to give us direction. If they don't mandate mailing them out, we don't intend to.
Yeah, she said to me, because I was concerned about the whole thing about mandating not only postponement of the town meeting, but also mandating mailing out the ballots. And she said the bill that she saw was optional for both, but they're going to give us the option of that we could do either one. That's my understanding from her. And
yeah. We have Peter and I talked about this because he's got to work, but there's a training tomorrow that the VSBA is doing to give an overview of that, and I am going to do that. We do expect that it will pass. My hope is that, and superintendent actually testified to make the folks understand that it's not all that simple. There's multiple towns and some supervisory unions, and everybody would have to we'd only have 3 towns to coordinate, right? But some people have 10, 12, large numbers of towns, with town clerks who may say, yeah, we want to delay, and others that say, nah, we don't really care. So, there's those logistical, and even just if we had to mail out ballots, I know from talking with Kathy and Tanya and Swanton last vote for the general election, it was a lot of work to mail to every single, and it was important to do, but it's something that I think local select boards and town clerks should be able to weigh in whether they do that. Peter, I assume that we'll be able to request an absentee ballot should we want one.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So I'll let y'all know what the skinny is. If we have to hustle and do something, I'll let you know.
I believe that's all we have to go over. I don't think there's anything else.
Mhm.
Buddy raising their hand, so I guess at this time I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Devin first, Peter's second. All those in favor, raise your hand. Motion carries 7-0. We are adjourned at 8:13.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.